My husband said he cking hates our baby and wishes it was never here. Now, I've started planning an exit strategy to protect my baby. In a small suburban neighborhood, there lived a family that seemed normal from the outside. Jane, a 43-year-old woman, and Robert, a 55-year-old man, had a whirlwind romance that led them to marriage. Their love story had been unconventional but beautiful, and they were eager to start their life together. However, when Jane unexpectedly became pregnant, their lives changed in ways they hadn't anticipated. From the moment their son, Samuel, was born, Jane could feel a shift in Robert's attitude. It wasn't that he didn't love his child, perhaps it was that he never imagined being a father again at his age. Robert had always been more of an independent soul, enjoying freedom and spontaneity, traits that had originally drawn Jane to him. But when Samuel entered their lives, Robert seemed burdened by responsibilities he hadn't anticipated. He quickly withdrew from the role of a nurturing father, instead becoming resentful and irritable. Jane, meanwhile, was trying her best to adapt to the demands of motherhood. She embraced the sleepless nights, the endless feedings, and the constant comforting. Samuel was a colicky baby, crying for hours without much comfort. And while Jane saw it as part of the ups and downs of parenting, Robert grew increasingly frustrated. He complained that the crying interrupted his peace, and on more than one occasion, he snapped at Jane to make it stop. It was during one of those rough nights, with Samuel's cries echoing through their home, that Robert finally broke. He said something that shattered Jane's heart. "I hate this. I hate that he's here. I wish we never had him." The words were like a knife to Jane's soul. She couldn't believe that the man she loved could speak with such venom about their innocent child. That night, she started planning an exit strategy. Jane was smart. She knew that leaving wouldn't be easy, especially since Robert was controlling about their finances and had a temper. She carefully began putting money aside from her freelance work. She reached out to her friends, discreetly inquiring if anyone could help her if she needed a place to stay. Her focus was on protecting Samuel, even if it meant tearing apart her marriage. Robert's frustration only grew worse as weeks passed. He refused to help with even the simplest tasks, changing diapers, feeding, or even comforting Samuel when he cried. Instead, he would sit on the couch, watching television or scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the exhaustion in Jane's eyes. She felt isolated and alone, longing for the partner who had once made her feel cherished. One particularly exhausting day, Jane had to leave the house to run an errand, and she left Samuel in Robert's care. She gave Robert specific instructions, hoping that this time he would finally step up. However, as she drove, her phone buzzed, and a notification from the baby monitor app appeared. With a sinking feeling, she opened it and saw her son alone in his crib, crying, while Robert sat on the couch. Jane could hardly believe her eyes. How could he ignore their child like that? She turned her car around and sped home, fury and heartbreak twisting inside her. When she arrived, Samuel was still crying. Robert hadn't moved. Jane scooped her son into her arms, comforting him as tears of her own threatened to fall. She turned to Robert and asked him, "Why didn't you pick him up?" Robert just shrugged, muttering that he couldn't deal with it. In that moment, Jane knew there was no fixing things. Her heart broke for her son, who deserved so much more. While all of this was happening, Jane also found herself dealing with another, equally distressing situation involving her sister, Evelyn. Evelyn had always been the favorite child, charming, confident, and always the center of attention. Growing up, Jane often felt overshadowed by Evelyn's larger-than-life personality. Still, she had loved her sister and supported her through thick and thin. But Evelyn had a knack for taking advantage of people, including Jane. One day, Evelyn showed up at Jane's doorstep, frantic and in tears. She was embroiled in a messy breakup with her boyfriend, Marty, and needed a place to stay. Jane, despite all her own struggles, let her sister in without hesitation. She thought maybe, just maybe, this time Evelyn would appreciate her support. But true to form, Evelyn quickly took over Jane's home, bringing chaos and drama that Jane simply couldn't afford to deal with. She often spoke poorly of Jane's situation, questioning why Jane even stayed with Robert if he was such a bad father and husband. Instead of being a support system, Evelyn was a source of stress. She flirted openly with Robert, made snide comments about Jane's parenting, and often seemed to care more about her own problems than Jane's deteriorating situation. The final straw came when Jane overheard Evelyn laughing with Robert one night, saying, "You guys are just a mess, aren't you?" It was clear that neither of them took her seriously, and she felt utterly alone. Jane started questioning everything about her life, her marriage, her family, and even her own decisions. She realized that she needed to break free, not only from Robert but from the toxic influences in her life, including Evelyn. She deserved peace, and Samuel deserved a happy home, even if it was just the two of them. Jane decided it was time to leave. She packed a few essentials, took Samuel, and left in the middle of the night. She went to her best friend Sarah's home, who welcomed her with open arms. For the first time in months, Jane felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She was free from Robert's resentment and Evelyn's toxicity. She could finally focus on giving Samuel the love and stability he deserved. In the weeks that followed, Jane began to rebuild her life. She filed for divorce and started therapy to process the emotional toll of her marriage. She also set clear boundaries with Evelyn, refusing to let her sister manipulate or guilt her any longer. It wasn't easy. There were nights when Jane cried herself to sleep, overwhelmed by the uncertainty of her future. But every morning, she would look at Samuel's smiling face, and it gave her strength to keep going. One day, Evelyn showed up at Jane's door, apologetic and teary-eyed. She claimed she wanted to make amends, that she had realized how poorly she had treated Jane over the years. Jane listened but kept her guard up. She had heard Evelyn's apologies before, and this time, she needed actions, not words. She told her sister that while she loved her, she couldn't allow toxic behavior in her life anymore, especially now that she had a son to think about. Evelyn seemed to understand, and for once, she didn't argue or make excuses. She simply nodded and left. It was a bittersweet moment for Jane, who wished things could have been different but knew she was doing the right thing. Jane's journey wasn't just about leaving Robert or setting boundaries with Evelyn, it was about finding herself again. She realized that she had spent so much of her life trying to please others, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect sister, the perfect mother, that she had lost sight of who she was. In the quiet moments, after Samuel had gone to bed, Jane began to rediscover her own passions. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since her college days. It was messy and imperfect, but it was hers, and it made her feel alive. She also began writing about her experiences, sharing her story on an online forum for women who had left toxic relationships. To her surprise, her posts resonated with many others. Women reached out to her, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and resilience. Jane found a sense of community, a reminder that she wasn't alone in her struggles. One day, Jane received a message from a woman named Margaret. Margaret was in a similar situation, trapped in a loveless marriage with a partner who showed no interest in their children. She was scared to leave, unsure if she could make it on her own. Jane wrote back, sharing her story and offering words of encouragement. She told Margaret what she wished someone had told her: "You are stronger than you think. You deserve love, and so do your children. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it." Months passed, and slowly, Jane began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. She had found a job that allowed her to work from home, giving her the flexibility to be there for Samuel. She had made new friends, people who lifted her up instead of dragging her down. She had even reconnected with her parents, who had initially been skeptical about her decision to leave Robert but eventually came to support her. As she stood in her new apartment, watching Samuel take his first wobbly steps, Jane felt a sense of pride that she hadn't felt in a long time. She had made it. She had walked away from a life that no longer served her and had built something better. It was far from perfect, but it was real, and it was hers. Jane's story is one of resilience and self-discovery. It teaches us that sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that set us free. She learned that love should never come at the cost of one's own well-being, and that family, while important, shouldn't be a source of constant pain. In the end, Jane chose herself and her son. She chose to walk away from a relationship that was toxic, from family dynamics that were damaging, and from a life that left her feeling empty. She learned that she was stronger than she ever imagined, and that true happiness comes from within, not from pleasing others or living up to their expectations. The journey wasn't easy. and there were moments of doubt and fear. But Jane's story is a reminder that it is never too late to start over. To create a life filled with love, peace, and joy, and sometimes, that means letting go of the people and things that hold us back. Even if it's painful. For anyone out there who feels trapped or alone, Jane's story is a beacon of hope. It's proof that there is life beyond the darkness, that there is joy after the pain, and that you are never truly alone. There is always a way forward, and you are always deserving of love and happiness. A mother's heartbreak, struggling alone through loss and the ghost of an absent father. It was the kind of news that changes your entire existence, the kind that turns your world upside down and leaves you questioning whether you even have the strength to go on. I never thought that my life would become a whirlwind of grief, confusion, and loneliness, and I certainly never imagined that I'd be alone through it all. The very person I had loved and trusted disappearing when I needed him the most. My name is Eliza. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and I want to share the most painful, complicated chapter of my life with you. A story that might help others find comfort in knowing that they are not alone. And a story that speaks to the strength we can find even when everything else falls apart. It all started when my partner, Chris, and I had been together for 4 years. We were happy. At least I thought we were. Life seemed like it was finally on the right path for me, a stable relationship, a promising job, and the idea that maybe we could build something special together. The news of my pregnancy came like an unexpected wave, catching me off guard. It wasn't exactly planned, and at first, I was overwhelmed. My job held promising opportunities for advancement, and I knew that having a child would change my life, my priorities, my freedom, my ability to chase those career opportunities that I had worked so hard for. I remember sitting Chris down, holding my breath as I told him. There was a long silence that followed, one that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. We talked endlessly, about what this meant, about our lives, about whether we were ready. And, ultimately, we decided to go ahead with it, to have this baby. To make it work, we would build a life together as a family. For a short time, there was hope and excitement. We picked out baby names, talked about what the nursery might look like, and shared nervous laughter over what kind of parents we might be. It was a fragile joy, but it was real. But at around 20 weeks into my pregnancy, just after finding out we were having a baby boy, everything changed. Chris disappeared, abruptly, without warning. He stopped answering my calls and messages, his silence growing like a void that swallowed me whole. I went from calling him every day to trying every hour, my heart racing with worry. Days passed, and then weeks, until eventually, I learned from his mother that he had moved back in with her. The conversation was curt, dismissive, as if I was nothing more than a stranger asking for directions. I knew then that he wasn't coming back. Chris's sudden departure left me overwhelmed. I was carrying our child, but I was alone, no partner, no support, and no idea how I was going to do this on my own. But I was determined to make it work. I prepared for motherhood alone. I went shopping for baby clothes, for a crib, for all the little things that I had once thought we would do together. My belly grew, and with it, so did my love for the little life I was carrying. Even if Chris wanted nothing to do with us, I had my baby, and that was enough. At 31 weeks, I started feeling sharp pains that I thought were nothing more than Braxton Hicks contractions. Those harmless practice contractions that many women experience during pregnancy. But as the hours wore on, the pains became more intense. I knew something was wrong. By the time I arrived at the hospital, my water had broken. Everything was a blur of doctors, bright lights, and the muffled sound of medical equipment. My baby was born prematurely, rushed away before I even had a chance to hold him. The following days were a nightmare. My tiny son was in the NICU, fighting for his life. I remember sitting by his side, holding his impossibly small hand, whispering to him, telling him that he was loved, that he wasn't alone, that he had a whole future ahead of him. I tried to contact Chris again, hoping beyond hope that this news would bring him back, that maybe, if he knew how much our son needed him, he would come. But there was nothing, no answer, no response. Less than a week later, my baby passed away. It was a quiet, devastating end to the fight he had been so bravely putting up. I remember holding his tiny body in my arms, feeling an emptiness that words can never truly capture. There is no pain quite like the pain of losing a child. It's as if a piece of your soul is torn away, leaving a raw wound that you know will never heal completely. In those moments, I felt like I had failed, like I hadn't been enough for my baby. That somehow I hadn't done enough to keep him here with me. In the weeks that followed, I tried again to contact Chris and his mother. I left voicemails, sent messages, pleading for some acknowledgement, some support, but there was nothing, just silence. My parents, bless them, stepped in to help me with the funeral arrangements. They did their best to be there for me, but I could see the worry etched into their faces, the helplessness in their eyes as they watched me break apart. Eventually, I stopped trying to reach Chris. I couldn't keep bearing the weight of being ignored, of being reminded over and over that I was alone in this. 5 months after my baby's birth and death, Chris showed up at my door. I had just gotten back from a walk, and there he was, standing in my living room. He looked different, angry, almost wild. Without even a greeting, he demanded to see our son. The words caught in my throat, and I told him what had happened. He stared at me, his face twisting in shock and disbelief. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out. In the days that followed, I was bombarded with messages from Chris's mother and other family members. They accused me of hiding the truth out of spite, of deliberately not telling Chris about his son's passing. The words were harsh, filled with anger and blame, and it was all too much. I confided in my sister, hoping for comfort, but even she said that maybe I could have tried harder to inform them. Her words cut deeply. They made me question myself, question whether I had done enough. Had I truly not done enough? I had lost my son too. I was struggling, barely able to keep myself together. And yet, here I was, being blamed for someone else's absence, for their decision to walk away when things got tough. It was an unbearable weight, one that pushed me further into grief and isolation. Despite everything, I knew I had to keep moving forward. I moved into a new flat, one that held no memories of Chris or the nursery I had once dreamed of filling with laughter and love. My father, seeing my pain, paid for a private therapist to help me work through the overwhelming grief and confusion. Therapy was a lifeline. It gave me a space to release the anger, the sadness, and the sense of betrayal that had been eating away at me. Slowly, I began to find my footing again, though it was far from easy. There were moments of clarity, moments when I realized that I had done everything I could. I had reached out, I had tried to involve Chris, but in the end, he had made his choice. He had chosen to walk away, to leave me alone in the most vulnerable time of my life. And that wasn't my fault. It took a long time for me to come to terms with that, to accept that I wasn't the villain in this story, that I had done my best under impossible circumstances. I remember one particular session with my therapist when she asked me to describe what I would say to my son if he could hear me. I closed my eyes, and I told her about how I would tell him that he was loved, that I was sorry I couldn't do more, and that I hoped he knew how much he meant to me. I cried through the entire session, but afterward, there was a sense of peace, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to forgive myself. As the months went by, I distanced myself from Chris's family. I changed my number, deleted social media, and made sure they had no way of contacting me. I needed to heal, and I couldn't do that with their voices constantly reminding me of what they thought I had done wrong. My sister eventually apologized for her earlier comments, but our relationship was never quite the same. The trust between us had been fractured, and though I knew she hadn't meant to hurt me, her words had left a scar. Today, I'm still healing. I visit my son's grave when I can, a small, quiet place where I can sit and talk to him without fear of being interrupted. It's my way of keeping him close, of reminding myself that he was here. Even if it was only for a short time. I haven't seen Chris or his family since that day in my flat. And I hope I never do. I know that if they had wanted to be a part of my son's life, they would have been there from the beginning. This story may seem incredibly personal, but it's far from unique. The sad reality is that there are many parents who go through similar experiences, parents who are left alone to deal with the unimaginable, while those who should have been by their side disappear. I think of the story of another mother I met in a support group. Her partner had left when she was only a few months pregnant, and she had also lost her child shortly after birth. She described the same feelings of abandonment, the same accusations from family members who had no idea what she was going through. We bonded over our shared pain, And it was in those moments that I realized just how many people endure these silent struggles. Another example that comes to mind is a woman I read about who lost her husband in a car accident just weeks before giving birth. She faced her grief alone, raising her baby while dealing with the loss of her partner. Her story was different from mine, but the core of it was the same, a struggle to find strength when everything else had fallen apart. To keep moving forward even when the weight of grief felt impossible to carry. Grief is complex. It doesn't follow a timeline, and it doesn't always make sense. But through therapy, through support groups, and through the simple act of sharing our stories, I learned that there is strength in vulnerability. There is power in admitting that you are not okay, in reaching out for help, in taking things one day at a time, and there is courage in choosing to keep living, even when the life you once imagined has been shattered. If there is one thing I hope to convey through my story, it is that you are never truly alone, even in your darkest moments. The pain of losing a child is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I want others to know that it is possible to find light again. Even if it's just a flicker. Healing takes time, and it's okay if that journey is messy. If it takes longer than you expected. Or if it feels like you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I also want to speak to those who might be in Chris's position. Those who find themselves overwhelmed and unsure. Who think that disappearing is the answer. Please know that your absence leaves a mark. It leaves a void that cannot easily be filled. And the pain it causes lingers long after you are gone. If you can, stay. If you can't stay, at least offer your support in some way. Running away may seem like the easier option, but it often causes more harm than you realize. To those who are supporting someone going through grief, be patient. Understand that grief doesn't have a timeline, and that there will be good days and bad days. Sometimes, all someone needs is to be heard. To be reminded that they are not alone, and that their feelings are valid. My parents were my anchor, and I will always be grateful for the way they held me up when I couldn't stand on my own. As I close this chapter of my life, I am reminded of the importance of empathy, of being there for others, and of the incredible resilience we are all capable of. Life may not look the way I once imagined, but I am learning to find beauty in the small moments, in the quiet mornings spent with my father, in the peace of visiting my son's grave, and in the knowledge that I am still here, still standing, still moving forward. To anyone who might be struggling, please know that there is hope, even if it feels far away. There is light, even in the darkness, and there is strength within you, even when you feel broken. My story is not one of victory, but it is one of survival. And sometimes, that is enough.